Welcome to the Wanderer's Rest. Tonight, the bamboo forest waits in twilight stillness, and you are its guardian. The paths must be walked, the lanterns must be lit, and the sacred grove must be watched over through the gentle hours of night. Put down your burdens, step into the evening cool, and let the voice of the bamboo guide you into deep, peaceful sleep. You are safe here. Let us begin. The evening light has changed to that particular quality that tells you the day's business is ending. The blue-gray of approaching dusk settling over the narrow street outside your workshop. And the sounds of the neighborhood are changing too. The calls of merchants closing their shops, the footsteps of people hurrying home for evening meals, the gradual quieting as the district transitions from commerce to rest, from public to private, from the mask worn for customers to the face saved for craft. You move to the front of your workshop and begin the ritual of closing, sliding the wooden panels that during the day stood open to invite passers-by, now being drawn across the opening one by one, each panel fitting into its track with the whisper of well-maintained wood, the sound familiar and satisfying, marking the boundary between shopkeeper and artisan, between selling and making. The street outside is still visible through the small window you leave unshuttered, and you pause to watch the evening settling. Your neighbor, the fabric dyer across the way, is hanging indigo-dyed cloth to dry overnight, the deep blue fabric almost black in the fading light. And further down the street, the tofu maker is already shuttered completely, probably at his evening meal by now. And these small observations, these notes of your neighbor's rhythms, feel important somehow. Feel like part of the fabric of living in this place where craft and life are inseparable, where what you make and how you live are woven together like the bamboo ribs of a lantern frame. You turn back to your workshop interior, and with the street closed off, the space immediately feels different, smaller, but also more intimate, more yours. And the lanterns hanging from the ceiling beams, left over from today's work and previous days, seem to glow more brightly now in the gathering dimness, their paper surfaces catching and holding what little light remains from the window. And you decide to light them, to fill the workshop with their warm presence, because the work you have planned for this evening deserves proper illumination, deserves to be performed in beauty as well as function. You light them one by one using a long taper, reaching up to open each lantern's small door and touch flame to wick. And each lantern, as it lights, adds its voice to the space, not sound, but presence, warmth, a sphere of amber glow that overlaps with its neighbors to create a layered illumination that is soft and even, without harsh shadows, perfect for the detailed work of making. Some of the lanterns you made yourself weeks or months ago. Others are older, inherited from your teacher when you took over the workshop. And a few are truly ancient, made by your teacher's teacher, their paper yellowed with age, but still holding light, still serving their purpose with quiet dignity. And lighting them feels less like illuminating and more like waking, like calling them back to their essential nature, which is not to be objects, but to be light holders, light givers, transformers of candle flame into diffuse, welcoming glow. When the last lantern is lit, you stand in the center of your workshop and simply look around, taking in the space that has been your world for so many years. The worn wooden work table scarred with knife marks and stained with paste. The shelves holding rolls of washi paper in various weights and colors. The bamboo stored in the corner, waiting to be split and shaped. The tools hanging on their pegs, each in its proper place. And above all this, the floating constellation of glowing lanterns. And you feel that particular satisfaction that comes from being exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you're meant to do. And the evening's work hasn't even begun yet, but already you feel complete. Already you feel home. The work of making a lantern begins with bamboo, and bamboo begins with selection. You move to the corner where your supply is stored. Lengths of bamboo that you purchased last month from the craftsman who specializes in preparing it for artisans. Already cut to manageable lengths, but still needing to be split into the thin ribs that will form the lantern's frame. You select a piece by feel as much as sight, your hands knowing what they're looking for, the right diameter, the right weight, the subtle give that indicates the bamboo is properly dried but not brittle, still retaining some flexibility, some life. And when you find the right piece, you carry it to your work table and settle onto the low stool that has supported you through thousands of hours of work. The wood worn smooth and slightly concave where your body has shaped it over years. Your splitting knife, the Higo knife, waits on the table where you left it this morning, and you pick it up and feel its perfect balance. The weight of the blade exactly counterpoised by the handle. The edge sharp enough that it will split bamboo with barely any pressure. Just guidance, just intention translated through steel into wood. The knife is not new. You inherited it with the workshop, and it was not new then. Its handle darkened by the oil of countless hands, its blade showing the wear pattern of decades of sharpening. Each session removing a hair's width of steel until the blade has developed a subtle curve, a character, a personality even. And using it feels less like holding a tool and more like shaking hands with all the craftsmen who held it before you. A lineage of makers connected through this simple implement. You place the bamboo on the table and begin the work of splitting, positioning the knife at the top of the length and applying gentle downward pressure, and the bamboo accepts the blade and splits with a soft, clean sound, the crack running down the length almost of its own accord once started, needing only the gentlest guidance to keep it true, to prevent it from wandering off-center. And this is the skill. This is what years of practice teaches. Not force, but attention. Not pushing, but listening. Reading the bamboo's grain and following it, rather than imposing your will on it. The first split creates two halves, and these halves you split again into quarters, and the quarters into eighths, and the eighths into sixteenths, each split requiring the same careful attention, the same patient reading of grain, until you have a bundle of thin ribs, each one flexible enough to bend into curves, but strong enough to hold its shape, to provide structure for the paper that will eventually cover it. The work is rhythmic and meditative, requiring focus but not strain, and your mind settles into that particular state where thought becomes quiet and awareness becomes primary, where you're not thinking about splitting bamboo, but simply splitting bamboo, the action and the actor merging into a single flow. And time behaves strangely in this state, both passing quickly because you're absorbed, and slowly because each moment is full. Each split is complete in itself, requiring nothing more than what it is. The pile of ribs grows steadily, and you split more bamboo than you need for tonight's single lantern, because the work has its own momentum, its own satisfaction, and also because having prepared ribs ready makes future work easier, smooths the path for tomorrow's craft. And this thinking ahead, this care for future you, feels like a kind of self-love, a way of being kind to the person you'll be when you sit down at this table again. With the bamboo ribs prepared, the next work is forming them into the circular frames that will give the lantern its shape. And this work requires different tools, different skills. You need the small fire brazier to heat the bamboo slightly, making it more pliable. And you need the forms, circular wooden templates in various sizes that you'll bend the ribs around. And you need the thin cord for binding. And you need patience most of all, because bamboo will bend, but it will not be rushed, will not be forced, must be coaxed and persuaded into curves it doesn't naturally want to hold. You light the small clay brazier, adding a few pieces of charcoal and coaxing them to flame. And while they're catching, you select the ribs you'll use for this lantern's frame. You're making a medium-sized cylindrical lantern tonight, the most common type, the kind that hangs outside shops and homes throughout Kyoto. And for this, you'll need 2 circles for top and bottom, and vertical ribs to connect them, and horizontal ribs to provide additional support for the paper. The charcoal settles into steady burning, and you hold the first rib above the heat, not close enough to burn, but close enough to warm, feeling the bamboo soften slightly, become more willing, and then you bring it to the circular form and begin bending it, slowly, gradually, following the curve. And when it completes the circle, you mark where it needs to be cut and bind the ends together with cord, wrapping carefully, tightly, creating a join that will be strong, but also as invisible as possible. Because even though this structure will be hidden beneath paper, you believe that hidden work matters, that integrity exists in the unseen as much as the seen. The work continues, heating, bending, binding, measuring, adjusting, and each rib that's completed is a small victory, a small piece of structure emerging from formless bamboo, and you find yourself humming softly as you work. Not a tune exactly, but a rhythm, a musical expression of the work's pattern. And this humming is something you do without thinking, something that emerges naturally when you're content, when the work is going well, when the bamboo is cooperating, and your hands are sure, and the lanterns hanging above are providing their warm, steady light. And if anyone asked what you were humming, you wouldn't be able to say, wouldn't even be able to remember that you were humming, because it's not separate from the work, but part of it, the breath finding expression through sound, just as skill finds expression through form. When the frame is complete, two circles connected by vertical ribs, with horizontals placed at careful intervals, you hold it up and sight along it, checking that it's symmetrical, that the circles are parallel, that the verticals are evenly spaced, and satisfied that the structure is sound, you set it carefully on the table and simply look at it for a moment. This skeleton that will soon be clothed in paper, this armature that will soon hold light, and even in its bare state, it has a beauty, the beauty of good structure, of elements properly proportioned and rightly related. And you think about how the best lanterns are the ones where the frame is made with as much care as the visible surface, where the maker takes pride in what won't be seen because they know it matters, because they know that structural integrity and spiritual integrity are not separate things, but aspects of the same practice, the same devotion to craft as path, as way, as practice that shapes not just lanterns, but the person making them. The paper for covering lanterns is not ordinary paper, but washi, made by hand from kozo bark, thin enough to allow light through, but strong enough to endure, to last. And you keep rolls of it in various qualities and colors, some pure white, some with a slight cream tone, some dyed in subtle colors. And for tonight's lantern, you choose a particularly fine white washi, thin as a whisper, but with a texture that catches light beautifully, that will transform the candle's flame into a soft, pervasive glow without harsh spots, without the aggressive brightness of unmediated fire. You unroll a section of paper on the work table, feeling its surface with your fingertips, learning its character, and with a bamboo ruler and a brush loaded with water, you mark where it needs to be torn, not cut, because tearing gives a softer edge that will blend better when overlapped. And the technique of tearing washi is something that took months to learn, requires understanding the paper's grain, feeling for the direction the fibers run, and pulling in a way that separates rather than rips, that creates a feathered edge rather than a ragged one. The paper tears with a soft whisper, releasing a faint scent that always reminds you of mountain streams and clean air, some essence of the making process still held in the fibers. And you lift the torn section carefully, feeling its lightness, its delicacy, conscious that rough handling could damage it, could create tears or wrinkles that would show when lit. The paste for adhering paper to frame is made from rice starch and water, cooked earlier in the day and now cooled to a consistency like thin honey. And you use a broad, soft brush to apply it to the bamboo ribs. Not too much, or it will soak through the paper and create dark spots. Not too little, or the paper won't adhere properly. But just the right amount, spread evenly. A skill that seems simple when described, but took years to master. Years of lanterns with paste problems, with bubbles and wrinkles and weak spots, until finally your hands learned the right touch, the right amount, the right technique, without your mind needing to think about it. You lift the paper and bring it to the frame, and this is the moment that always requires the most care, the most attention. Because once the paper touches the pasted frame, it begins to adhere immediately, and repositioning it is difficult without damage. So the placement must be right the first time, must be aligned properly. And you've developed a way of holding the paper suspended above the frame, lowering it slowly, watching the alignment, making tiny adjustments before contact, and then committing, allowing the paper to settle onto the bamboo, your hands smoothing it gently from the center outward, pressing it against the ribs, working out any air bubbles, ensuring complete contact, and the paper accepts the paste and clings to the frame, and begins its transformation from separate sheet to integral skin, becomes part of the lantern, becomes the surface that will hold and transform light. You work your way around the frame, applying paste, positioning paper, smoothing and pressing, and each section that's completed makes the lantern more real, more itself, less potential, and more actual. And you can already imagine how it will look when lit, the warm glow it will cast, the way its light will soften the darkness without banishing it, will create a space of visibility and warmth without harsh boundaries, without the aggressive certainty of bright light, but rather the gentle suggestion of illumination, the invitation to gather near, to be present in its sphere. And this is what lanterns do, you think. This is their purpose. Not just to light, but to create gathering places, to mark centers, to say, here is warmth, here is welcome, come near. While the paste is still slightly damp, but the paper is secured, it's time to add the decorative element, the painted design that will distinguish this lantern from plain ones, that will give it character and beauty beyond mere function. You prepare your ink, grinding an ink stick on the Suzuri stone with a few drops of water, the familiar circular motion of grinding creating a meditation all its own, the ink gradually thickening from transparent to gray to rich black, and the scent of the ink is sharp and clean, mineral and somehow ancient, a smell that connects you to calligraphers and painters going back centuries, all of them grinding their own ink with this same patient circular motion, all of them watching black emerge from stone and water and compressed soot. Your brushes hang on a wooden rack beside the table, and you select one with a medium fine point, good for the design you have in mind. A simple pattern of bamboo stalks and leaves, traditional and elegant, the kind of design that never goes out of fashion because it's rooted in nature, in the material the lantern itself is made from, a kind of visual acknowledgement, a way of the lantern declaring what it is, where it comes from. You load the brush with ink, feeling the bristles take up the liquid, and you hold it poised above the paper for a breath, centering yourself, because once the brush touches paper, there's no erasing, no correction, only commitment, only the stroke as it emerges. And this moment of pause before painting is not hesitation, but preparation, gathering your attention, focusing your intention. The first stroke is always the most important. It sets the tone, establishes the confidence or lack of it. and you've learned to make that first stroke boldly, to commit fully, and the brush touches paper and moves in a smooth arc, thick at the beginning, thinning as pressure releases, creating a bamboo stalk segment with the natural variation of hand-drawn work. And immediately, you can feel whether it's right, whether your hand is steady and your attention is clear. And tonight, it is. Tonight, the first stroke is clean and sure. And this gives you confidence for the next stroke and the next, building the bamboo composition stalk by stalk, joint by joint, adding leaves with quick flicking strokes that suggest rather than depict, that capture the essence of bamboo leaf without laboring over detail. The work is absorbing in a different way than the structural work, where forming the frame was meditative and rhythmic. Painting is more intense, requires a different quality of attention, moment-to-moment presence, without the safety of rhythm. Each stroke a small leap, a small commitment, and you find your breathing synchronizes with the brushwork, holding slightly during a stroke, releasing as the brush lifts. A pattern of tension and release that creates a kind of muscular meditation, a body-centered focus that leaves no room for wandering thoughts, for worries about tomorrow or regrets about yesterday. Only this brush, this stroke, this moment of ink meeting paper. When the design is complete, you set the brush down and step back slightly to see the whole composition, to judge whether it's balanced, whether the elements relate to each other properly, whether the empty space, the the negative space, is working as it should. Because in this tradition, the unpainted areas are as important as the painted ones. The emptiness gives the design room to breathe, prevents it from feeling crowded, allows the eye places to rest. Satisfied that the balance is right, you leave the lantern to dry completely, the ink settling into the paper fibers, becoming permanent. And while you wait, you make tea, because the evening is still young and there's more work to do. But this moment, between completing one stage and beginning another, is a natural pause, a place to breathe, to appreciate what's been accomplished, to prepare for what comes next. The lantern is dry now, the paste cured and the ink set. And it's time for the moment you always anticipate with a particular pleasure. The first lighting. When the lantern that has existed as components and structure and surface becomes what it was meant to be, becomes light holder, becomes glow giver, becomes itself fully and completely. You've made hundreds of lanterns, maybe thousands. You stopped counting years ago, but this moment never becomes routine, never loses its small magic. Because each lantern is unique, each one casts light in its own way, and you never quite know how it will look until the candle is lit and the paper begins to glow. You open the small door in the lantern's base, the access point for placing and lighting the candle, and you position a fresh candle on the metal holder inside, securing it so it won't tip, won't create fire danger. Because even though paper lanterns are designed to be safe, to keep flame away from the paper surface through careful positioning and metal shields, still, the maker must be careful. Must ensure that beauty doesn't come at the cost of safety, that form and function remain in harmony. The candle secured, you strike a match. The scratch of it loud in the workshop quiet, the small flare of sulfur, and then the steadier flame. And you touch fire to wick, and the candle catches, burns, establishes itself, and you close the small door and step back and watch. The transformation is immediate and total. What was an object becomes a presence. What was structure and surface becomes atmosphere, becomes a sphere of warm amber light that pushes back the darkness without aggression, without the harsh certainty of electric light, but with the gentle fluctuation of living flame. And the paper surface glows evenly, the bamboo ribs creating subtle shadows that pattern the light, and the painted bamboo design appears not as black ink, but as darker shadow within the general glow, visible but integrated, part of the whole rather than sitting on the surface. You walk around the lantern slowly, seeing it from all angles, checking that the light is even, that there are no dark spots or overly bright areas, that the paste hasn't created any imperfections visible when backlit, and finding none, you allow yourself a moment of pure satisfaction, of pride, not in the sense of ego, but in the sense of craft done well, work done right, something made with care and skill, entering the world ready to serve its purpose. You hang the completed lantern from one of the ceiling beams, adding it to the constellation of glowing lanterns already there, and with each lantern added, the workshop becomes warmer, brighter, more itself. And you think about how lanterns are not just objects you make, but objects that remake the space they inhabit, that transform rooms and streets and gardens, that create pockets of warmth and welcome in the larger darkness. And this thought pleases you, this idea that your work continues after you release it, that the lanterns you make will go out into Kyoto and do their quiet work of gathering people, of softening night, of making dark spaces less lonely, less forbidding, more human. The evening is deep now. Full night has arrived while you were absorbed in work. And looking out the small window, you see the street is dark, except for the lanterns of your neighbors' shops and homes, each one a small declaration of presence, of life continuing, of human warmth persisting against the vast, indifferent darkness. And your lantern will join this company, will add its voice to the collective illumination. And this thought of being part of something larger, of contributing to the web of light that is human habitation, fills you with a quiet joy, a sense of purpose that requires no recognition, no praise, only the work itself and the knowledge that it matters, that it serves, that it helps. There is time for one more lantern before sleep calls, and you feel the desire to complete what you've begun, to end the evening with a finished piece rather than work half done. And so you return to the table and begin again, selecting bamboo, splitting ribs, forming frame, stretching paper, painting design. The entire sequence flowing more quickly now because your hands are warm, are loose, are in that state of relaxed competence where the work almost does itself, where conscious thought recedes and something deeper takes over, muscle memory and accumulated skill combining into a flow state where time behaves strangely and the boundary between maker and making becomes permeable, unclear, perhaps illusory. This second lantern you make slightly different, smaller, rounder, with a design of cherry blossoms rather than bamboo, using a subtle pink-tinted washi rather than pure white, creating variety, exploring within the tradition rather than simply repeating. Because even in traditional craft, there is room for expression, for variation, for the individual maker's voice to emerge through small choices, through subtle variations that distinguish one craftsman's work from another's while still operating within the shared vocabulary, the common language of form and technique that allows a Kyoto lantern to be recognizable as such, whether made by you or by the craftsman 3 streets over, or by someone a century ago. The work proceeds with a different quality than the first lantern. Less conscious attention, more trust, less checking and verifying, and more simply doing, allowing the hands to lead and the mind to follow. And this shift from thinking to being, from controlling to allowing, is one of the gifts that craft offers. One of the ways that making things becomes a spiritual practice, becomes meditation, becomes a path to understanding that transcends words, that lives in the body's knowledge, in the hand's wisdom, in the quiet certainty that comes from doing one thing well, repeatedly, with care and attention, until the doing becomes a kind of prayer, a kind of devotion, a way of saying yes to existence, yes to beauty, yes to the human capacity to transform raw materials into objects that serve and please and endure. When this second lantern is complete and lit and hanging from the ceiling beam beside its companion, you stand in the center of your workshop, surrounded by the warm glow of all the lanterns, some old, some new, some yours, some inherited, all of them burning steadily, all of them transforming their small portion of darkness into welcoming light. And you feel complete, feel finished not just with the evening's work, but with something larger, something harder to name, as though each lantern made is a small answer to a question you didn't know you were asking, a small affirmation of purpose, of meaning, of the value of patient craft in a world that often seems to value speed and cheapness and convenience over quality and beauty and durability. You extinguish the work candles one by one, leaving only a few lanterns burning to provide gentle light for your sleeping space. The workshop and living quarters are not separate. You sleep in a small alcove at the back, a futon stored during the day and spread on the tatami at night, a way of living that blurs the boundary between work and life, between craft and existence. And this blurring doesn't feel like a loss of boundary, but like an integration, like a wholeness, where what you do and who you are become inseparable, become one thing, one life, lived with intention and care, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from making beautiful, useful things with your hands. The futon is spread, the blanket pulled up to your chest, and you lie in the darkness that is not quite darkness, because the few lanterns you left burning continue their gentle work, continue their transformation of candle flame into diffuse ambient glow. And this light is not bright enough to keep you awake, but not so dim that you lie in complete blackness. Rather, you exist in a space of soft illumination, gentle enough to allow sleep, but present enough to provide comfort, to remind you that you're not alone in the dark, but accompanied by light, by warmth, by the creations of your own hands keeping watch while you rest. The sounds of the workshop settling surround you, the tiny creak of bamboo ribs expanding and contracting with temperature changes, the almost imperceptible whisper of paper moving in air currents too slight to feel, the soft occasional crack of cooling charcoal in the brazier you banked before lying down, and underneath all of these, the deeper silence of the building itself, this structure that has housed craftsmen for longer than you've been alive, that has held the sounds of work and the quiet of sleep through generation after generation. And lying here, you feel connected to all of them, all the makers who lay down in this same space after days of work, who looked up at lanterns they made or inherited, who felt the same satisfaction you feel now, the same tiredness in hands well used, the same peace that comes from purposeful work completed. Your breathing has slowed to match the lantern's gentle flickering, and you watch the play of light and shadow on the ceiling beams, the way the glow pulses almost imperceptibly with the candle's flames, creating subtle variations in brightness that are never quite the same twice. And this subtle movement is hypnotic, is restful, is like watching waves on a shore or leaves moving in a breeze, something that occupies the eyes without engaging the mind, something that allows thoughts to slow and drift and eventually dissolve into the general softness of pre-sleep consciousness. You think about the lanterns you made tonight, going out into the world. Imagine them hanging outside a shop or home. Imagine people gathering in their light. Imagine conversations happening, evening meals shared, children playing, lovers meeting. All of these human moments held within the sphere of light your hands created. And this imagination is not ego, but rather wonder. Wonder at the way objects move through the world, touching lives in ways the maker can never fully know, can never fully see, creating effects that ripple outward far beyond their immediate function. And you hope, not with urgency, but with gentle wish, that your lanterns bring some small beauty to the lives they touch, some small warmth, some small sense of welcome and peace. The lanterns continue burning, patient and faithful, and you continue breathing, slower now, deeper, and the boundary between waking and sleeping becomes uncertain, becomes a threshold you cross and recross, drifting towards sleep and returning to awareness and drifting again. And in this liminal state, the workshop seems to breathe with you, seems to be alive in some way beyond the mechanical, seems to be holding you the way the lanterns hold light, with gentle constancy, with purpose, with care. And you feel safe here, feel home here, feel held by light and craft and tradition and the simple satisfaction of work done well. And somewhere in that feeling, in that gentle holding, you slip across the final threshold into sleep, into rest complete and deep, surrounded by the warm glow of paper lanterns burning through the night, surrounded by light you made with your own hands, held by beauty you brought into being, sleeping the sleep of the craftsman who knows that tomorrow there will be more bamboo to split, more paper to stretch, more light to birth into the world. But tonight, now, there is only this: warmth, glow, gentle breath, and the peace that comes from being exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you were meant to do, resting in the heart of your craft, sleeping among lanterns like sleeping among stars, safe and warm and complete.